What happens when one of Hollywood's most enigmatic actors sits down for what should be a routine morning show interview, only to have the host dig into the most controversial chapter of his career? The tension in Studio 1A was palpable from the moment Billy Zane settled into that familiar interview chair across from Craig Melvin. What started as promotional chat about his latest independent film project quickly spiraled into something nobody in the studio, or watching at home, could have anticipated. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that had everyone talking, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with your thoughts on celebrity interviews gone wrong. Now let's get into exactly what happened when Craig Melvin decided to go off script. The interview began innocuously enough. Craig welcomed Billy with his trademark warm smile, diving into questions about the actor's upcoming thriller, where he plays a morally ambiguous detective. Billy, ever the consummate professional, answered with his characteristic intensity. His piercing blue eyes focused intently on Craig as he described his character's psychological complexity. "The role demanded something raw from me," Billy explained, leaning forward slightly. "Detective Morrison isn't your typical hero. He's flawed, damaged, and makes choices that blur the line between justice and revenge." Craig nodded, seemingly engaged with the standard promotional material. But then something shifted in his demeanor. His next question caught everyone off guard. "Speaking of blurred lines, Billy, there's been ongoing speculation about your involvement in the Meridian Productions controversy from 2 years ago. Your name keeps coming up in connection with some pretty serious allegations about how that film was financed." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Billy's expression hardened, his jaw tightening visibly. He hadn't expected this line of questioning, and it showed. "Craig, I'm here to discuss my current work," Billy replied, his voice measured but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "Meridian Productions was investigated thoroughly, and I was never charged with anything." But Craig wasn't backing down. He had clearly done his homework, and something had motivated him to press this particular button. "Never charged, that's true," Craig continued, his tone remaining conversational but pointed. "But the FBI investigation is still ongoing, isn't it? And there are financial records that show some interesting connections between you and several offshore accounts linked to the production company." Billy's hands, which had been resting casually on the arms of his chair, now gripped them slightly. His voice remained controlled, but there was a dangerous undertone that anyone who knew the actor would recognize as a warning sign. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about why I'm here today," Billy said slowly. "This is supposed to be about my film, not some fishing expedition based on tabloid speculation." The studio audience, which had been quietly attentive, was now completely silent. Even the crew members seemed frozen, sensing that something was about to go very wrong. Craig's producer, visible in the background, was making frantic hand gestures, but Craig seemed determined to push forward. "Billy, I understand your reluctance to discuss this, but our viewers deserve transparency. When a major Hollywood figure is connected to a case involving money laundering and tax evasion, that's news." "Connected by whom?" Billy's voice had dropped to almost a whisper, but it carried more menace than if he had shouted. "By anonymous sources? By people with agendas? You're talking about my reputation, my career, my family's livelihood, based on what exactly?" Craig pulled out a tablet, his movements deliberate and calculated. "Based on documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. Documents that show your production company, Zane Enterprises, received payments totaling $3.2 million from accounts that have since been frozen by federal authorities." The bomb had been dropped. Billy stared at Craig for what felt like an eternity, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked almost like betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "You ambushed me. This entire interview was a setup." "Billy, I'm just asking legitimate questions that—" "Legitimate?" Billy interrupted, his composure finally cracking. "You invited me here under false pretenses. Your people told my representatives this would focus on the film. Instead, you're trying to destroy my reputation on live television based on documents you clearly don't understand." Craig leaned back slightly, perhaps finally recognizing that he had pushed too hard. too fast. But he had committed to this path, and there was no turning back now. The American people have a right to know when their entertainment dollars might be funding illegal activities, Craig said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Billy stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent studio. His eyes never left Craig's face, and for a moment it seemed like he might do something dramatic. Instead, he took a deep breath and sat back down, but his posture remained rigid. "Let me be very clear about something, Craig," Billy said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his theatrical training. "You've just made a very serious accusation against me on national television, an accusation based on incomplete information and what I suspect is a deliberate misinterpretation of completely legitimate business transactions." The tension was unbearable. Craig's hands were visibly shaking slightly as he held his tablet, and beads of sweat had formed on his forehead. He had clearly expected Billy to either deny everything quickly or perhaps even walk off. What he hadn't expected was this controlled, simmering rage that was far more intimidating than any tantrum would have been. "Billy, if you could just explain the nature of those transactions. I don't owe you or anyone else an explanation for legal business dealings that have been twisted into something sinister by people who don't understand how film financing works," Billy shot back. "What I want to know is why you felt it necessary to try to ambush me instead of having an honest conversation about these concerns beforehand." Craig shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly realizing he had stepped into dangerous territory. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his approach, perhaps thinking that persistence would break Billy's composure completely. "Billy, I understand you're upset, but these aren't just random accusations. We've been working on this story for weeks. There are financial experts who've reviewed these documents and raised serious red flags about the money trail." Billy's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Financial experts? You mean consultants paid by your network to create a story where none exists? Tell me, Craig, did these experts mention that Zane Enterprises operates in full compliance with international banking regulations? Did they explain that those frozen accounts you're so concerned about were frozen as part of a completely unrelated investigation into cryptocurrency fraud?" The revelation seemed to catch Craig off guard. His confidence wavered for the first time since he'd started this line of questioning. But he pressed on, consulting his tablet again. "That may be true, but the timing is suspicious. The payments to your company occurred just 3 days before those accounts were flagged by the Treasury Department." "The timing," Billy repeated slowly, his voice dripping with disdain, "is called coincidence. Something that apparently doesn't exist in your version of journalism. You've taken a legitimate business transaction, connected it to an unrelated federal investigation, and presented it as if I'm some kind of criminal mastermind." The studio crew was now openly staring. Camera operators who should have been focused on their equipment were watching the confrontation unfold like spectators at a boxing match. The director, visible through the glass booth, was frantically speaking into his headset, undoubtedly trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial or let this play out. Craig took a sip of water, his hand trembling slightly. "Billy, if you could just walk our viewers through exactly what Zane Enterprises was paying for, it might clear up a lot of confusion." "Confusion that you created," Billy snapped. "But fine. Since you've decided to turn this into an inquisition instead of an interview, let me educate you and your viewers about how film financing actually works in the real world." Billy leaned forward, his intensity ratcheting up another notch. His voice took on the cadence of someone who was used to commanding attention, whether on stage or screen. Zane Enterprises received payment for executive producer services on 3 independent films over an 18-month period. The money came from Cayman Meridian Holdings, which is a legitimate investment vehicle used by dozens of production companies. The fact that some of their other investments later became part of a federal investigation has absolutely nothing to do with the films I worked on. Craig consulted his notes again, but Billy wasn't finished. Furthermore, every penny of that money was reported to the IRS, as were the taxes paid on it. The contracts were reviewed by entertainment lawyers. The payments were processed through regulated banking institutions, and the films themselves were completed and distributed exactly as contracted. "But Billy," Craig interjected, "doesn't it concern you that you were doing business with an organization that was engaged in potentially illegal activities?" Billy's eyes flashed with genuine anger now. "Potentially illegal? Do you hear yourself, Craig? You're condemning me for having a business relationship with a company that might have done something wrong with other clients? By that logic, every actor who's ever worked with a major studio should be investigated because those studios have, at various times, been involved in lawsuits or regulatory issues." The argument was logical, but Craig seemed determined to find some angle that would justify his ambush approach. "The difference is the scale. Billy, we're talking about millions of dollars moving through accounts that federal investigators now believe were part of an elaborate money laundering scheme." "Federal investigators believe," Billy repeated mockingly. "Federal investigators also believed there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Federal investigators believed the Boston Marathon bomber was someone he wasn't. Federal investigators believe a lot of things that turn out to be wrong." The political reference seemed to energize Craig, who perhaps saw an opportunity to shift the conversation to safer ground. "So you don't trust federal law enforcement?" Billy's smile was predatory. "I trust evidence, Craig. I trust facts. I trust the legal system when it's allowed to work properly instead of being circumvented by television hosts who think they can play prosecutor on morning television." The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Craig's face flushed red, and for a moment his professional composure completely slipped. "I'm not playing prosecutor, Billy. I'm doing my job as a journalist." "Your job as a journalist?" Billy's voice rose for the first time, though it was more incredulous than angry. "Your job is supposed to be informing the public, not conducting trial by television based on incomplete information and guilt by association." Craig set down his tablet with more force than necessary. "The public has a right to know when celebrities might be involved in financial crimes." "Might be involved," Billy repeated, standing up again. This time he didn't sit back down. "There's your problem right there, Craig. You're destroying people's reputations based on might be. You're ruining careers based on potentially. You're assassinating character based on possibly." The studio was dead silent except for the low hum of equipment. Even the director had stopped talking into his headset, apparently mesmerized by the confrontation unfolding in front of him. Billy took a step closer to Craig, who instinctively leaned back in his chair. "Let me ask you something. Craig, how would you feel if I went on television tomorrow and suggested that your aggressive questioning style might indicate that you're being paid by someone to target specific celebrities? What if I implied that your sudden interest in my finances was possibly connected to some larger conspiracy? What if I said that sources close to the network suggested you might be involved in something unethical?" Craig's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. Billy's hypothetical scenario had perfectly illustrated the absurdity and danger of the accusation by implication game that Craig had started. "That's ridiculous," Craig finally managed to say. "Exactly," Billy said with satisfaction. "It's ridiculous, but it's exactly what you've been doing to me for the last 10 minutes. Taking facts, adding speculation, mixing in some fear-mongering language, and presenting the whole mess as if it's investigative journalism." Craig tried to regain control of the situation. "Billy, I think you're overreacting. These are legitimate questions based on public documents." "Public documents that you've misrepresented and misinterpreted," Billy shot back. "And I'm not overreacting, Craig. I'm reacting exactly as any innocent person would react when they've been ambushed on live television by someone who's more interested in creating controversy than seeking truth." The standoff between the two men had reached a boiling point. Billy remained standing, towering over Craig, who was still seated, his professional facade cracking under the pressure. The power dynamic in the studio had completely shifted, and everyone could feel it. Craig made one last attempt to regain control of his own show. "Billy, I'm going to ask you directly, and I hope you'll give our viewers a straight answer. Did you know that the money you received came from accounts that are now under federal investigation?" Billy's response was swift and cutting. "I'm going to ask you directly, Craig, and I hope you'll give me a straight answer. Did you know that your questions are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how entertainment financing works? Or are you deliberately misrepresenting the facts to create drama for your show? The accusation that Craig was manufacturing drama for ratings hit like a physical blow. Craig's face went from red to pale in seconds. "I resent the implication that I'm making this up for ratings," Craig said, his voice tight with indignation. "And I resent the implication that I'm a criminal," Billy fired back immediately. "But unlike your implications, mine is actually supported by evidence. Your behavior this morning, your ambush tactics, your refusal to acknowledge the explanations I've given you, it all points to someone more interested in creating a spectacle than seeking truth." Craig stood up abruptly, perhaps trying to level the physical playing field. But Billy was taller, and his presence was simply more commanding. The move only highlighted Craig's desperation. "Billy, you're being hostile and evasive." "Hostile?" Billy's eyebrows shot up in genuine amazement. "Craig, you invited me here under false pretenses, ambushed me with accusations based on incomplete information, ignored every factual explanation I've provided, and now you're calling me hostile for defending myself? That's not hostility. That's self-preservation." The studio audience was completely captivated. This wasn't the polite, managed conflict they were used to seeing on morning television. This was raw, real, and increasingly uncomfortable to watch. Craig tried a different approach, perhaps hoping to appeal to Billy's sense of public responsibility. "Don't you think your fans deserve to know about these financial connections?" Billy's laugh was sharp and bitter. "My fans deserve to know the truth, Craig, not your distorted version of it. They deserve to know that their favorite actor hasn't done anything wrong, despite what certain television hosts might imply for the sake of ratings." "This isn't about ratings," Craig protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" Billy challenged. "Then why didn't you contact my representatives beforehand with these concerns? Why didn't you give me a chance to provide documentation that would have cleared up your confusion? Why did you choose to spring this on me live on camera in front of millions of people?" Craig had no good answer for that, and his silence spoke volumes. Billy pressed his advantage. "I'll tell you why, Craig. Because a rational conversation in a producer's office doesn't generate clicks. A calm explanation of business practices doesn't trend on social media. But a live confrontation, an ambush, a celebrity losing his temper on morning television, that's pure gold for your network." The accuracy of Billy's assessment was written all over Craig's face. The director, visible through the booth window, was now frantically signaling to cut to commercial. But Craig ignored him. "Billy, you're painting me as some kind of villain here." "You painted yourself as the villain the moment you decided to prioritize sensationalism over journalism," Billy replied coldly. "I came here as a professional, ready to discuss my work. You turned this into a trial. You made yourself the prosecutor and me the defendant, without evidence, without due process, without even basic courtesy." Craig's frustration boiled over. "The evidence is in those documents." "The evidence in those documents," Billy said with exaggerated patience, "shows legitimate business transactions that you've chosen to interpret in the most suspicious possible light. That's not evidence of wrongdoing, Craig. That's evidence of bias." The word bias seemed to trigger something in Craig. His professional training told him to remain neutral, but his personal investment in this story had compromised his objectivity, and Billy was making that painfully obvious. "I don't have a bias against you, Billy." "Don't you?" Billy stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more authority than shouting. "Then explain to me why, out of all the actors who've worked with Meridian Productions, you chose to target me specifically. Explain why my name is the one you decided to drag through the mud on national television." Craig opened his mouth to respond, but Billy wasn't finished. "Could it be because I'm not represented by one of the major talent agencies that advertise with your network? Could it be because I don't have a studio publicist who can threaten to pull access if you air unflattering stories? Could it be because I'm an independent actor without the corporate protection that shields bigger stars from exactly this kind of harassment?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. Craig realized that Billy had not only defended himself effectively, but had also exposed the uncomfortable reality of how entertainment journalism actually worked. "Billy, I think you're reading too much into this." "Am I?" Billy's smile was razor-sharp. Or am I reading exactly the right amount into it? You picked on someone you thought couldn't fight back, Craig. You thought you could railroad an independent actor with vague accusations and incomplete information. You thought I'd either crumble under pressure or storm off in a rage, giving you the perfect viral moment. Craig's face was now a mask of barely controlled panic. Everything Billy was saying was hitting uncomfortably close to home. And worse, it was all being broadcast live. "That's not true," Craig said weakly. "Then prove it," Billy challenged. "Show me one instance where you've given this same treatment to an A-list actor represented by Creative Artists Agency. Show me one time you've ambushed someone with the backing of Disney or Warner Brothers with half-baked accusations and guilt by association." Craig couldn't, and they both knew it. Billy nodded as if Craig's silence had confirmed everything he'd suspected. "That's what I thought. You picked on the wrong independent actor, Craig. You assumed I'd be easy prey, but you forgot that independent doesn't mean powerless, and it certainly doesn't mean I'll let you destroy my reputation without a fight." The silence that followed Billy's accusation was deafening. Craig stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, clearly searching for some response that might salvage what was left of his credibility. The studio audience was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. Billy looked around the studio, taking in the faces of the crew members, the stunned audience, and finally settling his gaze back on Craig. When he spoke again, his voice carried a finality that everyone recognized. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Craig? You had an opportunity to have a genuine conversation about the challenges facing independent filmmakers in today's market. You could have explored the complexities of international financing, the struggles artists face when trying to maintain creative control, the very real issues that affect thousands of people in this industry." Craig tried to interject, but Billy held up a hand. "Instead, you chose to turn this into a cheap ambush based on guilt by association and financial documents you clearly don't understand. You chose sensationalism over substance, accusations over inquiry, destruction over discovery." The words hit Craig like physical blows. His face had gone from pale to ashen, and beads of sweat were now visible on his forehead. "Billy, please, let's try to have a constructive conversation about this," Craig pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. Billy's expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like pity. "Constructive? Craig, you've spent the last 15 minutes trying to destroy my reputation on live television. You've implied that I'm involved in money laundering, tax evasion, and federal crimes. You've done this without evidence, without giving me fair warning, and without any regard for the damage you might cause to my career, my family, or my future projects." Craig's hands were shaking now as he gripped the edge of his desk. "I was just asking questions." "No," Billy said firmly, his voice carrying the full weight of his theater training. "You weren't asking questions. You were making accusations disguised as questions. There's a fundamental difference, and as a journalist, you should know better." The studio director was now openly signaling for a commercial break, his gestures becoming more frantic by the second, but neither man was paying attention to him. Billy took a step back and looked directly into the camera that had been focused on him throughout the confrontation. When he spoke, it was clear he was addressing the viewers at home rather than Craig. "Ladies and gentlemen watching at home, what you've witnessed here today is exactly what's wrong with modern journalism. Instead of seeking truth, we've seen character assassination. Instead of fair reporting, we've seen trial by television. Instead of professional integrity, we've seen a desperate grab for ratings at the expense of someone's reputation." Craig finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "Billy, that's not fair." Billy turned back to face him, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to ambush me? Was it fair to misrepresent financial documents? Was it fair to imply criminal activity based on circumstantial connections? Was it fair to use your platform and your audience to try to destroy someone who came here in good faith?" Each question was delivered like a hammer blow. Craig seemed to shrink with every word. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "I'm sorry if you feel ambushed," Craig said weakly. "Feel ambushed?" Billy's voice rose for the first time in the entire confrontation. I don't feel ambushed, Craig. I was ambushed. This was planned, calculated, and executed with the specific intention of creating drama at my expense. Billy reached down and unclipped his microphone, the small action somehow carrying enormous symbolic weight. The gesture said everything about his intentions before he even spoke.
You know what, Craig?
I'm done. I'm done with this conversation, I'm done with this ambush, and I'm done pretending that what you've done here today is anything resembling journalism. Craig stood up quickly, panic evident in his voice.
Billy, please don't leave.
We can work this out. Billy looked at him with something that might have been contempt. Work this out? How exactly do you work out a character assassination, Craig? How do you take back implications of criminal activity that you've broadcast to millions of people? How do you repair damage that you've done deliberately and maliciously?
I never said you were guilty of anything,
Craig protested desperately. Billy's laugh was harsh and humorless. You didn't have to. That's the beauty of your technique, isn't it? You imply, you suggest, you raise questions, you express concerns. You get all the impact of an accusation without the legal liability that comes with making direct claims. The accuracy of this assessment was written all over Craig's face. Billy had not only exposed his tactics but had done so in front of a live audience.
Billy, please, sit back down and let's finish this interview properly,
Craig begged.
Properly?
Billy shook his head in disgust. Craig, you lost the right to ask for proper treatment the moment you decided to abandon it yourself.
You can't ambush someone for 15 minutes and then ask them to pretend it never happened.
Billy started walking toward the exit, his movements deliberate and purposeful. The camera operators frantically adjusted their positions to follow him, creating a dynamic visual that would undoubtedly be replayed countless times. Craig called after him desperately.
Billy, if you leave now, people will think you have something to hide.
Billy stopped dead in his tracks and turned around slowly. The look he gave Craig was absolutely withering. People with functioning brains will think that I refuse to participate in my own character assassination. People with any sense of justice will understand that I'm not obligated to sit here while you destroy my reputation for entertainment value. And people with any integrity will recognize that what you've done here today is a disgrace to journalism. With that, Billy Zane walked off the set, leaving Craig Melvin standing alone in front of a studio full of shocked faces and millions of viewers who had just witnessed one of the most dramatic confrontations in morning television history. The cameras continued to roll as Craig stood frozen, clearly having no idea how to recover from what had just happened. The director finally cut to commercial, but the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had turned into a masterclass in how not to conduct journalism, and everyone knew it. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Did Craig cross the line with his ambush tactics, or was Billy overreacting to legitimate questions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more celebrity interview breakdowns and behind-the-scenes drama that you won't see anywhere else.